This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 21. Lucius Vitellius orders Pilate to Rome, and the death of Tiberius. King Aretas of Nabatea was still smarting over the disrespectful way Antipas divorced Aretas's daughter to marry his own niece. King Aretas relished the opportunity he had decades earlier to join forces with Rome and ransack the villages of Judea. Perhaps now he would have another chance. Plus, there was an ongoing dispute over the region of Gamalitis. This would be Aretas's opportunity to settle that once and for all, too. The generals from each side arrayed their army against the other. In an act of treachery, some fugitives from the deceased Tetrarch Philip supported Aretas's army against Antipas, resulting in a devastating defeat for Antipas. Those who remembered that Antipas had imprisoned and then beheaded John the Baptist saw Antipas's defeat as God's judgment against him. For his part, Antipas desperately reached out to Tiberius, who agreed to send Roman troops to avenge the loss. Tiberius wrote to Lucius Vitellius and ordered him to make war against Aretas, and gave Lucius the option of taking him alive and bringing him in chains to Rome, or killing him and sending his head to Tiberius. In obedience to the emperor, Vitellius began to mobilize 2 legions. The Samaritans were still seething over Pilate's malicious response to the events on Mount Gerizim when so many were killed by Roman soldiers. Pilate had been prefect for 10 years now, and his authoritarian style was too much. Everyone knew the Romans were in charge, but Pilate's cruelty and savagery were excessive. The Samaritans had a long list of grievances. They believed that Pilate was deliberately trying to provoke the people under his care. They recalled how, some years earlier, they had sent an embassy to Rome to meet with Tiberius himself. At that time, they told Tiberius how Pilate had set up shields in the temple on which were inscribed something to the effect of, "Set up by Pilate in honor of Tiberius." Though 4 of Herod's sons had appealed to Pilate to be reasonable, he had been inflexible. The people had said to Pilate that they knew Tiberius would not want to inflame the situation, so they might just take the case to him directly. Pilate demurred only because he did not want to give them such an opportunity, but he did not remove the shields, so they wrote and sent the letter to Tiberius. Upon reading the letter, Tiberius became angry. He thought Pilate had needlessly made a volatile situation worse, and so he ordered Pilate to remove the shields from the temple and to install them in Caesarea, dedicated to the temple of Augustus, for whom that city was named. So with one victory over Pilate in the bag, and Pilate's violence against the people not waning, it was time to make another appeal to the emperor, beginning with the newly appointed governor of Syria, Lucius Vitellius. The Samaritans believed their case was religious in nature. Their religious identity had always been respected, and Pilate overreacted in a harsh way. Pilate maintained that he was simply reacting as a responsible Roman official who did not want matters to escalate. He had been effective for 10 years. When Lucius Vitellius heard these Samaritan complaints, he seized the opportunity and made a politically savvy call. He removed Pilate and sent him to Tiberius for a one-on-one meeting. In that way, each side could plead their case to the emperor in person. There would be no letters, only personal testimony. Vitellius then sent his friend Marcellus to take care of the affairs in Judea as prefect. So Pilate departed from Caesarea Maritima for Rome. It was a difficult journey because they were traveling during the Mare Clausum, which means closed sea, the period of November to March, when winter weather made for treacherous sea conditions. Further, they were traveling east to west against the prevailing winds. Pilate ruminated on what had been handed to him. Some thanks for 10 years of service in one of the most challenging provinces of the empire. When he met Tiberius, he knew he would have a chance to tell him in his own words what he had done for Rome in that backwater. Perhaps, Pilate thought, He would even be given a more prestigious post, possibly Egypt. Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, son of Antonia the Elder and Mark Antony, was married to Agrippina, his first cousin once removed. He was now accused in the Senate of treason and acts of adultery and incest with his sister Lepida. At trial, he was found guilty, and he was now awaiting his punishment, and he knew that was likely to be death. In the year 37, the 77-year-old Tiberius had finally decided to leave Capri and visit Rome after more than 10-year absence, making his way along the Via Appia. In honor of Tiberius's visit, the Roman Senate decreed that all capital punishments should be postponed for a period of 10 days. After all, he might want to hear some cases and reverse or suspend judgments altogether. At only 7 miles away from the city, Tiberius attempted to feed his pet snake, but found that it was being eaten by a swarm of ants. A soothsayer looked at the situation, then stared into Tiberius's eyes and said, "Beware the power of the mob." Tiberius immediately recognized this as an omen and turned the retinue around back to the Campania region. But he fell ill at Astura, just south of Antium. He continued on a little more, eventually making his way to Misenum, where he planned to take a ship back to Capri. But his illness only grew worse, and he was not able even to board the ship. The doctor at hand felt Tiberius's pulse and gave him no more than 2 days, at which point the imperial court dissembled. Messengers rushed to generals and armies, while impromptu meetings were held by those close at hand. On March 15th, the Ides of March, the very day Julius himself had been assassinated decades earlier, word spread that Tiberius had stopped breathing. Gaius believed that he was dead, and therefore stepped forward with a jubilant crowd ready to claim the throne. Then, shockingly, news came that Tiberius had regained his voice and sight and was asking for food to revive himself. Jubilation now turned to panic. Courtiers scattered, feigning grief or ignorance, while Gaius stood frozen, his soaring hopes crashing into dread. Macro, the Praetorian prefect, was a man of action. He cleared the room and then ordered the emperor smothered under a pile of heavy clothes. Tiberius thus died on March 16th in a country house in Misenum that had once belonged to the Roman statesman Lucullus about 100 years earlier. Tiberius had lived an incredible life. Born on November 16th, 42 BCE, to Livia, as she was married to Octavian. Tiberius, stepson to Octavian, had been married to the love of his life, but Octavian broke that marriage apart when he insisted that Tiberius marry Julia, Octavian's daughter. Essentially, it meant stepbrother and sister married to each other. Perhaps not surprisingly, that relationship didn't go well. Tiberius exiled himself only to return later as the adopted heir of Octavian, aka Augustus. Livia saw to that. After Augustus' death, Tiberius became emperor, and shortly thereafter the young general Germanicus died. Rumors persisted that Germanicus had been poisoned on the orders of Tiberius. And whether true or not, Tiberius was responsible later for the death of Germanicus' wife Agrippina and their 2 older sons. Only the 3 daughters and the lone son, Gaius, remained. With the last 10 years of Tiberius' life spent on Capri, he had been an absent emperor, deferring matters of state first to Sejanus, and then, after executing him, to other trusted aides. Now, Tiberius was dead, and there was hope that the sole remaining son of Germanicus, the blood relative of Augustus himself, might take the throne. With Tiberius dead, news about him traveled quickly. When the crowds in Rome heard, they began to shout with glee, "To the Tiber with Tiberius!" Others said that they would treat his corpse with the hook and throw it down the Gemonian stairs, a shameful and humiliating punishment reserved for the most hated and wicked of Rome's enemies, most recently done to the corpse of Sejanus. Herod Agrippa was still being held prisoner in Rome, though more house confinement rather than the Tullianum. As he was going out to his bath, his own freedman came running up to him with excitement. He said, in Hebrew, "The lion is dead." Agrippa knew immediately what he meant, but wouldn't allow himself to believe it. Agrippa's jailer saw the exchange and inquired about what was going on. So he shared the news with him too, and together they all rejoiced, the jailer going so far as to prepare a meal, as he and Agrippa had grown to be friendly. During the celebratory dinner, however, more rumors came to them that Tiberius was only sick and would be entering the city soon. With that news, the jailer immediately changed his tune and said to Agrippa, "Was it your plan to cheat me with a lie about the emperor and not face any punishment? You will surely pay for this malicious stunt with your head." He then had Agrippa bound again and increased the guard around him, so his conditions were more severe than before. An especially unfortunate series of events happened for some of those who had been imprisoned on a capital offense. The 10-day waiting period for capital punishment that had been authorized by the Senate had now been reached, but rumors of Tiberius's condition were contradictory. Those to be executed tried to throw themselves at the mercy of the Roman people, but many of the jailers did not want to be responsible for any errant decision. Moreover, the Senate was not extending this waiting period, so jailers thought it best simply to proceed with the executions in any case. But those swift executions only inflamed the people even more. Even in death, it seemed, the cruelty of Tiberius and his reign continued. Next time, we'll learn about how Gaius, also known as Caligula, came to the throne.